But he is going to be arguing, Dwight Eisenhower's been president for 8 years. John Kennedy, this kind of new face on the block, is going to say they're soft on communism. They allowed, in essence, Cuba to be taken over by the communists. They allowed losses in Central America. Kennedy is going to stress that the Republicans are soft on building nuclear weapons. There's a missile gap. And I know we're starting to get these narratives sort of overlaying themselves. You know, by 1968, the press is going to pick up in Vietnam that there's now a credibility gap, right, with the Democratic Party, that the leaders are now under criticism. But Kennedy himself is going to make this argument of saying we need to have more special forces, we need to have more nuclear weapons, we need to engage around the planet, leaning into that NSC 68 argument that kind of brings us into Vietnam. Right? So again, if you're looking at this through the lens of the movie JFK or Oliver Stone, that John Kennedy was opposed to the Vietnam War, nothing could be further from the truth. There's zero evidence of that. Right? When he takes office in January 1961, the CIA comes into him and says, listen, we've got a plan to overthrow Fidel Castro, and you don't have to take any responsibility. Kennedy was adamant about this. I do not want to have American troops invading Cuba. I do not want to have our flag as a representative of this. But if you can stage a coup, like you did in Iran, like you did in Guatemala, like you think you can do in Vietnam, if you can make this difficult problem go away, go ahead and do it. And it's a fiasco. Everyone involved knew this was coming. They knew where the invasion was coming. They knew they were going to not have air support. Right? So again, one of the things in contemporary society, the Ukrainians are asking for air support. Why? Because that's the only thing that's going to prevent the kind of artillery fire that fighters are facing. That's what air support does, is to protect the people on the ground. Right? And without the Americans' willingness, without Kennedy's, and he's not going to, he says, you know, quite forcibly, I am not going to put our name on this. It looks as if Kennedy is weak and vacillating. So his perspective is to come in as a strong Cold Warrior, as someone who is going to change the relationship towards Central and South America, who's going to go to Berlin and famously, Ich bin ein Berliner. He's going to say, I am the American president, I'm a Berliner. I'm living here in this divided city, and if they invade Berlin, then they're invading a city which is just a part of America, right? So he is going to expand America's commitment in regards to fighting the Cold War. This is going to obviously kind of focus itself in regards to Cuba, because Cuba is an example of his administration's failure, right out of the gate. And Cuba is going to become a flashpoint for the Russian response to the American expansion. Why Cuba? Well, first of all, there has been a socialist revolt. There has been an overthrow of the American established government there, and it's a thorn in the side of the United States, right in the middle of the Caribbean, right? You know, 100 miles or so, hundreds of miles from the United States. During this point in time, in the first 18 months of Kennedy's administration, he is going to deploy, put into action, over 5,000 new ICBMs, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. That's what ICBM stands for. So he's going to modernize, using in essence these supersized weapons. The one you're going to see about to explode is 100 megatons, meaning quite literally everyone in this room has had some form of irradiation because it's been in the atmosphere. Has had some form of, every living thing on this planet has been irradiated by this thing repeatedly. Those isotopes are still up there, they're still deteriorating, and the reason why we don't do atmospheric testing is because of that. He is not a Cold Warrior in regard, he's not a meek kind of, oh, well, we're going to peacenik some, you know, peace and love and all that kind of stuff. He is going to, in essence, say the United States is going to radically expand the amount of military support of it. The Soviets are going to see this as quid pro quo, right? If you're going to put nuclear weapons in Turkey, right, in the Caribbean, just south of Ukraine, if you're going to put nuclear weapons in West Berlin, right? We are going to do the same, and we're going to put them close to your shores. And so what American spy satellites, not satellites, really kind of flight passovers and whatnot are going to be able to identify is that they are putting in short-range tactical nuclear weapons, which means what? There's not a central repository. You know, we have all these nukes and they're in, you know, Nebraska and what have you, and it's all, you know, it's all coordinated through the military. Tactical is in place. The person sitting, if the missile is erected right here, the person sitting in these launch facilities are the ones who can hit the button. You don't have to wait for a call from the Kremlin. You can just go, I'm going to use a nuke, off it goes, right? These are within 10 to 15 minutes striking distance of the United States, and yes, Corpus Christi is one of the targeted locations because we're a military base, right? So this becomes a very critical situation. For 2 weeks, basically 12 and a half days, Kennedy is going to demonstrate, right? So he's 2 years into his administration, or a year and a half into his administration. He's going to demonstrate that here's a guy who understands and is learning on the job. And so again, if you're looking not to criticize but to evaluate Kennedy, what you see is zero domestic president achievements. There's really nothing to talk about. But he is going to begin to learn, in essence, the fears of a global thermonuclear war that could potentially happen if something is mishandled. It's Kennedy who is going to manage this. Most of this information is now public knowledge. You can see the debates that take place in terms of the XCOM back and forth. What does the Kennedy administration agree to? They agree kind of a quid pro quo. You do this, I'll do that. Kennedy agrees that the United States will never again physically invade Cuba. We have not done that, right? So we have never physically invaded Cuba, sent Marines and whatnot since 1962. At the same time, we will withdraw our short-range nuclear weapons that are in Turkey and in West Germany. Right? So we'll take away the threat that is 15 minutes away from Moscow. In return, the Soviets will withdraw their nuclear capacity in the region as well. Right? This is as close as you're going to get to a direct confrontation. And again, this notion of playing a game of nerves, right, is then a reflection of, okay, who's president of the United States? Do they have the maturity and the ability to manage these kinds of situations? Years later, in this, the documentary comes out in '92. The guy you're going to see here is Robert McNamara, who is the Secretary of Defense in the Kennedy administration, and he's going to be involved in this debate. And notice it's really in 3 parts. The first is kind of talking about the missiles of October kind of scenario. The second is about the debate. But the third is when he goes to Cuba in 1992, and when he refers to Mr. President, he's talking, you'll see a picture of him standing there, 2 old geezers standing there, one of them is Fidel Castro. That's who he's referring to. And he asks them the question, right? Were these nukes there, and were you capable of using them? And the response is pretty...
We mobilized 180,000 troops. The first day's air attack was planned at 1,080 sorties, a huge air attack.
Next 24 hours, what do we need to do? First, we need to do first, we need to develop a specific strike plan.
What do you hit? Just like Vietnam.
Second thing we have to do is to consider the consequences. I don't know what kind of world we live in after we start Cuba. How do we stop at that point? I don't know the answer to this. The chances of it becoming a much broader struggle are increased as you step up and become a danger to the United States.
This is 30 years old.
It wasn't until January 1992, in a meeting chaired by Castro in Havana, Cuba, that I learned 162 nuclear warheads, including 90 tactical warheads, were on the island at the time of this critical moment of the crisis. Mr. President, I have 3 questions of you. Number 1, did you know the nuclear warheads were there? Number 2, if you did, would you have recommended to Khrushchev, in the face of a U.S. attack, that he use them? Number 3, if he had used them, what would have happened to Cuba? He said, number 1, I knew they were there. Number 2, I would not have recommended to Khrushchev. I did recommend to Khrushchev that they be used. Number 3, what would have happened to Cuba? It would have been totally destroyed. That's how close we were.
All respect to Cuba, I'm more concerned about nuclear weapons used in the United States, right? In terms of his analysis. What is he saying here? He's saying that if you have an inexperienced, a gun-happy, a president who is motivated by the polls, by looking soft, by I'm gonna go send in a sortie. Had they done that, you have at least 90 tactical nuclear weapons that would have been launched. What would have the United States responded with? A full-scale attack on the Soviet Union. That's the scenario that developed as a result of this. And it reflects positively on Kennedy in terms of his ability to manage his way through that. But his foreign policy issues, and again, we talked about his role in Vietnam, his foreign policy issues are going to lead to his own demise, literally and figuratively. We agree not to invade Cuba, but we use the CIA to do what? To undermine wherever possible Fidel Castro. Operation Mongoose is a CIA, again, you can Google it and find out all the details, is a CIA effort to assassinate Castro. Anyone connected to Cuba, anyone connected to, in favor of the socialist revolution in Cuba and Central America is aware of this going on. The lead element of this is Kennedy's own brother, Bobby Kennedy. And as Senator Wofford said, he was out CIAing out the CIA. So this element is going to be important. You'll hear a name that I mentioned before in terms of Kennedy's recklessness, sort of sexual dalliances. He was fooling around with Sam Giancana's girlfriend, Tony Soprano's squeeze. You'll hear Sam come back here in just a second. So.
Now his brother asked him to continue the effort to overthrow Castro. He was put in charge of a new clandestine plan, Operation Mongoose. Ousting Castro is the top priority of the United States government, he said. He ordered hit-and-run raids, destruction of roads and bridges, sabotage. At the same time, the CIA was using mobsters, including Sam Giancana and Johnny Rossello, in a plot to assassinate Castro. This strange alliance had begun during the Eisenhower administration and continued unbroken through the Kennedy years. Kennedy clearly wanted the Cuban leader eliminated. We were hysterical about Castro at the time, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara later admitted.
And while again, this is not front page New York Times, Corpus Christi College, anyone connected to Cuba is aware of this. Anyone who is an activist, a partisan, crazy about the subject. And again, we live in an internet age, so you know the people who get down the rabbit hole. You know the QAnons and the AOCs and all that kind of stuff who are like, everything is this. Right? Those individuals are well aware of this established effort of the United States to assassinate the leader of another country. Right? We still haven't given up the family jewels, so we know that element is going to be a motivating factor for John Kennedy's assassination. So his desire to get Cuba is going to motivate people to be able to say, well, if they're killing their president, why can't we kill theirs? Right? Kennedy arrives in Love Field in Dallas, and been to Dallas, the Dealey Plaza and all the rest of that stuff, with a preordained path, right, in the city, driving in an open Cadillac. He's done this as a campaigner. It made him look healthy and fresh and clean and all that because he's suntan and he's a good-looking guy, et cetera, et cetera. This image is a compilation. It's not the Zapruder film. Obviously, the shots have been fired. The speech that he is carrying, right? So I want to make sure I'm clear about the speech that he is going to be delivering and has worked on as he's flying. Why the hell is John Kennedy in Dallas, Texas? Dallas is about as conservative and anti-Kennedy a city in the state of Texas. Why the hell is he there campaigning in that city when his vice president is from Texas himself? He's there because he is trying to shore up his credentials as a hardline anti-communist. The speech he's containing is going to say we're going to accentuate our presence in Vietnam. We're going to accentuate our opposition to Cuba. Right? These issues are this political talisman that's going to help him. As he's driving 1233, and there's something called the Zapruder, spelled with a Z, it's a Zapruder film. It's a guy standing there with an 8mm camera who caught the entire assassination, one of the reasons why we know so much about it. 7 seconds, you hear 3 shots ring out, right? It's found later that it's a bolt-action rifle. I'm not a gun person, but if you are, you probably could operate and aim. Boom, click, bolt, aim, click, bolt, aim, click, within 7 seconds. Lee Oswald is a trained Marine. He's a marksman. He gets his marksman's badge as a Marine using this exact same rifle. What do we know? The 3 shots, the first one, again, you can see it on the Zapruder film, the open motorcade, the governor of Texas is sitting in the front seat, John Connally and Kennedy, both of them veterans, understand what a gunshot sounds like. it hits the branch, both of them are going to react. Both of them are going to have heard a gunshot. The second one is going to be, is going to hit Kennedy and pass through his body. It doesn't hit any bone or anything like that. It passes through his upper neck or lower neck and through his larynx, and it hits Connolly. That's going to be the quote-unquote magic bullet, which we'll get to in just a second. And the third one is the fatal shot. The third one is going to hit Kennedy in the head. Oswald is shooting basically from a distance of here to, I would say, the lunch. The cafeteria is probably too far away. Basically from here to the Quonset outside. If you're someone who is trained on a rifle, that is not a hard shot, right? They're moving at maybe 12 miles an hour. It is not a difficult process to be able to do, right? We see visual evidence of this, all three of these bullets, right? And Kennedy is going to shot. If you've seen the Zapruder film, right after the third shot, you see Jackie Kennedy her husband is just been had his head blown off, and she jumps off the back of the motorcade. In her recollection, this is again, how do you have empathy for someone going through such a horror? She saw a portion of the back of his skull fly off, and in her recollection, she's like, I know the doctors are going to need that, right? That's the kind of horror situation. People will make all kinds of inferences about what Jackie Kennedy is doing at the end there. She's trying to find the pieces of her husband. It's not significant, but everyone wants to know it anyway. This is a murder. Any other murder? Who did it? How'd they do it? Right? It's a murder investigation, and the question is how, right? And this first question, and if you're interested, there's a great book, Gerald Posner wrote a book called Case Closed. We know 99% of the physical data in terms of this murder investigation. We know there's 3 shots. There's no Gressy Knoll. There's no foreshot. There's no back and to the left, right? And I can talk about the reason why his head does that. It's just blood pressure. It's just the way in which we're designed. We're all under pressure underneath our skins, right? What you see are the 3 bullets, as I mentioned. The first one is a miss. The second one, here's Kennedy reaction. This is from the Zapruder film. You can see Kennedy getting struck in the throat, so he's reacting to the pain. But you can also see John Connolly reacting, so he's sitting in front of him. If you've seen the movie JFK, what do? They put 2 people in a chair and sit them face to face like this and say the bullet passes through Kennedy, changes direction, goes through the shoulder, hits his wrist, and ends up on the floor of the motorcade looking like this. If you look at it head on, this is a high velocity bullet. This is not it's not like a lead slug or something like that. This is something that's going to, unless you're hitting something hard, the bullet is going to maintain its form. And you can still see the damage that was done if you look at it head on. If they were sitting that way, it would be impossible to have one bullet do that kind of damage. Look at the picture. That's not how they're sitting, right? And what you can do is reconstruct and look and say, okay, here's where they're sitting. Here's where the magic bullet struck, right? And if you take this line and continue it back up, guess where you end up? On the 5th floor of the Book Depository, right where Lee Harvey Oswald is going to be taking those shots, right? So you don't have to, how did he do it? He did it by simply getting 3 shots off that are, reason I couldn't do it, but certainly someone who knows their way around a rifle certainly could, right? The question is why? And here's where, again, that movie JFK, he's a great filmmaker, but Oliver Stone's not that great of a historian, is going to imply all kinds of boogeymen out there, right? Lyndon Johnson wants this, or the military-industrial complex. No one has been more friendly to the military-industrial complex since Abraham Lincoln, right? Kennedy is spending money hand over fist in regards to military expansion. He is not standing in the way of, the Lockheed Martin Corporation for getting another multi-billion-dollar contract. The Russians were as clearly confused by this as anyone else, according to available resources at the time, right? The mob is often seen as the source of this, but if they were mad at anybody, it was probably Bobby Kennedy more than anyone else. The Warren Commission, Lyndon Johnson is going to immediately, not 3 years after 9/11, not a year after January 6th, immediately commission, bring in the leaders of the House and the Senate, both parties, the leaders from the Supreme Court, the leaders of both political parties. This is not a cloak-filled room of secret people. Gerald Ford, Earl Warren, the head of the Supreme Court of the United States are on this commission. The Warren Commission is going to investigate and interview everyone, and when the CIA comes in and says, did you have any knowledge of Lee Oswald? No, I never heard of him. Did you have any knowledge of efforts to try and assassinate Fidel Castro? No, not us, right? They are going to lie about their activities. That's where the conspiracy lies. That's where the information. How does Lee Oswald do this? Well, he's a madman. He's a nut. He's the guy who's, letting smoke bombs off and shooting people in New York subways. He's an idiot, right? That kind of thing. No, he was politically motivated. Again, Malcolm X is going to get in big trouble by saying, guess what, the chickens just came home to roost. And that is an accurate assessment, is that American violence overseas is going to precipitate violence here as well. Okay? In 1976, the House investigated this conspiracy again, right, and found a probable conspiracy. What is a conspiracy? It means that two people are in cahoots, not telling the truth to an investigation. That is the definition of a conspiracy. What is the conspiracy? Again, busy slide. Occam's razor is often used in science fiction. The real simple answer to Occam's razor is don't look for complex problems when the reality is probably a lot more direct. Americans love conspiracy theories. Why? Because we think someone somewhere is in charge. I got bad news for you. As an old 60-something, no one's in charge, right? Money definitely is driving a lot of the issues in which we kind of consider to be ideological and whatnot, and it just isn't. Right? There isn't any secret plan of, QAnon and, look at the letters and all that kind of stuff. But we tend to want to think that that's the case. What's the simple argument here? Here's an individual, Lee Oswald, again, he picks up the middle name because he assassinates the president. He is a committed Marxist. He's a trained marksman. While he's in the Marines, he's going to repeatedly get written up for violent actions. He's going to pull a gun on his commanding officer. He's going to be discharged. He's then going to defect to the Soviet Union. Now, our CIA never heard of this Marine who defected to the Soviet Union, right? We're only in the middle of the Cold War. He goes to Mexico City and comes back through the American embassy to get back into the United States. All of this, the assumption that somehow the CIA had not been involved or been tracking this guy, is absurd. And in essence, what we see, what are the files that are released? The files that are released show that very clearly, right? So you have, in essence, this individual who wants to basically do an eye for an eye. You're trying to kill Castro, I will try and kill you. And he is going to act out violently, angry, again, he fit in perfect in 2022. Most people want this guy to stand for something more. I love this DA, right? The district attorney. I had to walk out of the room because another few minutes is going to beat the shit out of him, right? It's just this mealy, this, world peace and communism around the world and whatever. And it's just like, no, you just killed this inspirational president and death in office, the first time of an assassination in 60 years. People are shocked. People are stunned. When in reality, what you can do is just sort of follow the evidence that Operation Mongoose is in large part going to be doing that. 2017, the most recent kind of iteration of this, the kind of last batch of unclassified files were released. The remaining files still have what's called redactions that you can't read. Mostly there are names involved, and you're asked basically by the intelligence agencies, are you willing to have your name released? And if you say no, and you're still alive, then they're not going to release it. Right? Basically, that's what's remaining. What the files show is, again, the CIA is aware, clearly aware, and very interested in what Oswald is doing. And what they're doing is basically they're following him. Who else is he going to implicate? Who else is he going to... He had no idea he was going to pull out a rifle and shoot Kennedy, but Kennedy drives by him in an open motorcade. Right? And so it provides an opportunity for a violent and largely unhinged individual to participate in that. Both the CIA and the FBI hide that from the Warren Commission. So there's your conspiracy, right? Here we are facing World War III, and no, I don't know anything about it. Right? Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Wounds are accounted for. Oswald has motive. Operation Mongoose falls logically into this. It is not the great conspiracy that we all want it to be. Again, Malcolm X is probably the most accurate assessment. He is going to take his own people are going to shut him down as a result of this. He's told to shut up because of the nature of it, right? It's just too painful for the American public. But when faced with the nervous public in this environment, the CIA is still going to lie. That's what comes due in the 1970s. That's what the Church Commission report does. That's why the CIA has the whole file called the family jewels. Because in a democracy, you can't simply have institutions that say, well, your pay grade isn't high enough to be able to have this information. No, you work for us. The distinction is an important one. You know, and again, the Oliver Stone movie is interesting, but it sure as hell isn't accurate. And it sure as hell isn't going to be doing this. You know, or none of this is true because they got to, because they could have got it. Right? And it could be part of the system. All right, questions, assassination questions? Anyone have any relations up in who are in Dallas? When my kids are in grade school, this is going to be real, their second grade teacher's husband, common law husband, was in Dallas. He was working at the public library, which is about 2 blocks away. He was about, he has subsequently passed, but he was real slightly built. He was about 5'3", and he had kind of thinning hair even as a young man. He looked like Lee Oswald, right? And someone had heard, he showed up to his job, and all of a sudden he hears this pounding on the door outside the library. He opens it up, and there are 17 Texas Rangers here with weapons drawn. And he's like, and I'm like, what did you do? And he goes, I closed the door. I said, how did that work? No, it didn't work too well. So they questioned him. No, you're not Lee Oswald. No, you weren't in the book depository. But, you know, for a while he was a suspect. I know. It's like, you know, it's close to home. It's you know, it's in terms of that. If you go to Dealey Plaza, you'll recognize kind of just, it's a shooting. I mean, there does not need to be any kind of conspiracy of people, grassy knolls and umbrellas and whatnot. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why did the CIA lie?
Because in large part, it uncorked this notion that we are playing that game in places like Guatemala, in places like Chile, in places like Vietnam. It opened up that idea that somehow the United States was playing the dirty tricks. But the Russians were doing, I mean, again, no, we're not Pollyanna here. It's not like we're the only one doing this. But we're willingly using the CIA to kind of, again, politicians. I can go to the American public and explain a very complex issue, and half the people will hate me for it, or I can pick up the phone and call the CIA and hit the easy button. It served everyone's purpose to have the CIA not come clean on that, right? Because you have an institution that can still do the dirty tricks. And eventually, after Watergate, this is going to start tearing away the fabric of people's trust in terms of the government, right? And it's real easy to say, well, we're doing it too.
So they can still do it, basically.
They can still do it, yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
sure they are.
but, I mean, actually they are, right, yeah. But the argument would be is that there is at least some clear oversight and a willingness that if the situation existed, they would say, oh, yes, we were involved in the assassination of, you know, whatever. Again, we'll see, right? I'm old enough to be a little more James Thomas about this. All right, back to History 1302. As I mentioned, one of the questions for this subject, for the 60s, is defining the 60s, right? When you get the review guide, one of the questions on the 60s, what are the 60s? Well, you can bullshit your way, oh, well, peace, love, and whatever, and that ain't gonna fly, right? One version of the 60s is kind of understood as the John Kennedy 1960s. High idealism, this is generational, and remember that clip? No generation, this generation, my generation, is that he's looking and saying that this post-World War II environment has put the United States in a position of world leadership, and he embraces it. And we're gonna change the world, and we're gonna fight poverty, and we're gonna fight disease, and war itself, if you remember the clip. Hi, you know, that freshman, I'm gonna be a marine biologist and get straight A's. Great, what are you gonna do? Well, I'm gonna go hit the pub, right? I'm gonna go to the bar. Well, you can do that, but you gotta make sure to get the studying done too. So this idealism is classic 60s, high, you know, it's impressionistic, right? We're gonna do this. Notice there isn't a counterculture yet. No hippies, I probably shouldn't have played Jimi Hendrix, right? We're 63, 64, you still have a predominantly consensus-based society, meaning what? White, male, native born, generally Protestant, are in charge and are the ones calling all the shots here. There is no flower power, there is no hippies, there is no youth culture. The civil rights movement has gone nowhere, largely because the president hasn't done anything to it, right? This post-war generation is focused on, look at what we all believe in together. And we are, as Americans, drawn to that. We'd like to think that we, you know, e pluribus unum, not a many one, et cetera. But it also is a period where you see America's strong commitment to that policy of NSC 68, of nation building, of going in and changing societies that we know nothing about, and saying, in essence, we as Americans have the right to step into Vietnam, or Guatemala, or Iran, or Cuba, and tell them what the hell they're going to do. Right? And I, again, underscore, the policy it replaced, containment, was Cuba, good luck to you, but this thing is gonna end poorly, right? Look at Cuba today. We've been under communist rule since 1959. It is not a place that is going to you're not gonna put it on a poster of, hey, look at how successful communism is in terms of economics, right? People want out of those scenarios. That's what containment says. Hey, listen, you do you, but don't mess with us in any way, shape, or form. That's this 60s. And there sure as hell isn't the hippie power that you're kind of thinking about when normally kind of assuming with the 60s. Right? Again, it's sort of artificial to link it to a presidency, but it follows so nicely, for a survey class to kind of go on with that. All right, who follows John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson? First Texas president. I will admit my own bias, and that is I've always enjoyed the presidency of Lyndon Johnson. I liked him personally in terms of who he was. I understand that the many, many dark elements to that. The reality is that I've separated out Johnson from the Vietnam Johnson, the one who kind of blindly goes into escalation. From the 1960s Johnson, you can't do that. His evaluation, he is never going to be seen as one of the top 10 presidents of all time, in large part because you can't just say, well, he was a serial killer, but look, he invented a COVID vaccine. Oh, okay, that balances out. No, it doesn't, right? Is that he is as damnable for his Vietnam policies as he is praiseworthy and laudatory for what he is going to do in terms of the domestic politics, right? Texas president, first of two, and from the Hill Country. This image here, kind of these images I showed you, this sort of montage, kind of captures Johnson in all of his glory. He is a bigger than life character. He is very focused on his own kind of his own prowess, what he does well, his own physical capabilities, all that kind of stuff. Lyndon Baines Johnson becomes LBJ. He marries Lady Bird Johnson, LBJ. They have LBJ Ranch. He shows the press his dog, Little Beagle Johnson, LBJ. Right? He is somewhat of an egoist, what politician isn't. But he also has this sort of Texas flair to him, this sort of real man kind of thing. Right? He has a gallbladder surgery and shows the press, here's the surgery, here's this, in a political cartoon turns that into Vietnam, right? Here's the scars that I've got there. He's showing off his hunting dog, and these reporters are like, put the dog down, right? The dog is used to that kind of look at the steer's balls and what have you. His style is very over the top in terms of the Johnson effect, right? You can see the way in which he gets close in, I won't do it again, you guys are far out. Gets close in your personal space. He is going to be pressuring you to be able to be on his side. And he is effectively, if you're interested in politics at all, I would argue he is the single most effective politician. How to understand power, how it operates, how it involves personal things, it involves, somewhat trivial things, but it also involves process, how to get laws passed, et cetera, et cetera. Johnson is the best at that. The close second would be Abraham Lincoln. That's the level of skill this guy kind of brings with him. Born in Texas, by the way, if you've seen before, Doris Kearns Goodwin, she's older than me now, but she was actually an intern for LBJ, wrote a couple of really good books on him. Robert Cairo is also, the LBJ library is right up in Austin, so all this stuff is available there. Stonewall, Texas, Hill Country, right? So no oil, no open land and steers and all that kind of stuff. His dad was a state representative, man's man, tough guy. His mom wanted him to be someone refined in culture, to go to college. And the two of them, the two parents, again, I'm not so big on psychohistory. First of all, psychology is mushy anyway, but number two, we don't have this person on the couch to talk to them. But both of his parents are going to influence Lyndon and create, in essence, this sort of internal dialogue of himself. His parents generally, to correct him when he was wrong, or when he did something they opposed, was to withdraw all kind of love, right? So they'd give him the cold shoulder. This is, again, occurrence. One time when he was younger, Johnson decides to stop violin and dancing lessons. I'm like, go get a Lyndon. That his mom set up for him. And this is him saying, for days after I quit those lessons, she walked around the house pretending I was dead. And then to make it worse, I had to watch her being especially warm and nice to my father and my sister, right? This idea of withdrawing any kind of support. Same thing is true later on. And this is occurs good with friends, colleagues, and members of his staff. Johnson was capable of unusual closeness. He enveloped people one by one in the warmth of his affection and concern. If the hospital bill of a friend needed payment, he paid it. If an employee's child needed a coat, he bought it. If the secretary's house needed renovation, he supervised. But in return, politics, right, he demanded a measure of gratitude and loyalty so high that disappointment was inevitable. So here's a guy psychologically who is driven to politics to make people feel good, to make people feel like something is accomplishing, but it's driving him in terms of the way in which he is going to see himself in his purpose in life. He is going to go to basically Texas State, effectively, renamed at the time, but not Texas State. He's going to get an education degree. He's going to teach. He's going to go to Cotulla, and he's going to teach in Mexican-American schools. There's Lyndon Johnson. There's his class. He is going to get a real estimation of both poverty and what race and ethnicity can do in a negative sense in American society. And he's doing this in the 1930s during the Great Depression. And so Johnson is going to be drawn to, he's seen as a typical Southern redneck. He's not. He's a populist. He's looking around and he's saying, in essence, government can do things, not to give away checks. Johnson doesn't write checks, but to provide opportunity. And he joins the New Deal. He, in essence, kind of goes through this political process. And what you see repeatedly throughout his career is that he is very good at amassing power and using that to pass legislation. He's very bad at mass politics. So getting out and pressing the flesh. It exposes his kind of vulnerability, his own psychological doubts and fears. Again, all that. But in almost every one of his campaigns, he either withdraws his name or gets sick or has to, in one way, shape, or form, kind of respond to ill health. This strong faith and consensus is what's driving him. He's, first and foremost, a Democrat, so he's a party man. But he is looking and saying that the party itself is going to reflect these populist values. When he gets rich and powerful, and he's going to be rich and he's going to be powerful, these populist values simply shift over to big business. Right? I'm a populist. I support, Texas businesses. I support the oil and gas industry. I support, et cetera. So he doesn't feel as himself kind of changing. Obviously, power politics is one to do that. He is very ill-served at the national level, which is ironic because when he becomes the senator from the state of Texas, he is going to completely revise the rules of the Senate. The reason Mitch McConnell has a little pipsqueak compared to the power that Lyndon Johnson, but the reason Mitch McConnell has the power he had, he's no longer the leader, but he still kind of acts as if he is. I mean, he still has that kind of imprint in the Senate, is because of all the rules that Lyndon Johnson has established. Cloture and filibustering and party perks and who is on what committee. All of those rules now go through the leader of the Senate. And it's Lyndon Johnson who is in 1957 going to force through the first civil rights bill. Right? So it's Johnson who is going to be pushing this stuff at the national level. It's not Eisenhower, it's not Kennedy, but he can't translate that into campaigning. He's going to run for president in 56, come in a distant, whatever. He's going to be running second to John Kennedy in 1960, and John Kennedy is John Kennedy. He's articulate, he's good looking, he talks well, he's young, he's a new generation. And here you got Lyndon Johnson with the big ears and the nose and the southern drawl and all the rest of that stuff. Kennedy, for his part, at least is wise enough to pick Johnson as his vice president. So he's the second leading vote-getter in the primaries, and then basically shelves Lyndon Johnson, just gets him out of the way. And so it's not a place where Johnson is going to be able to help Kennedy kind of pass legislation. The assassination is going to, and this is a famous picture, taken on the flight back from Dallas. John Kennedy's dead body is in Air Force One. His wife is wearing the exact same clothes, bloodstained, that she was wearing when he was shot and killed. You have, I believe it's the chief of the Texas Supreme Court who is going to administer the oath of office. But, here's Johnson, who took the oath, became president for millions, that was still illegitimate. And his language, I talked about Lincoln's language, all birth and death. His was all, it had all these kind of sexual overtones to his language. And when you hear the tapes of Johnson, he's always talking about, I love you, I want to caress you, I want to hold you. You're like, dude, back up a little bit. Was still illegitimate. A naked man with presidential coverings, a pretender to the throne, a legal usurper. There was Texas, my home, and home to both the murder and the murderer of the murderer. And there were the bigots and the dividers and Eastern intellectuals who were waiting to knock me down before I could ever begin to get up. The whole thing was almost unbearable. He's not a politician in the sense that he likes to pass legislation. He thinks that what politicians are in the business of is to make the world a better place for their constituents, right? And when was the last time I said this in class about a politician? Never, right? Maybe you could get a little bit of Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt. He is rare in that regard, right? But he also does not have the ability, he does not want to anger, Eastern intellectuals. He does not want to kind of step in and go, okay, the president was just assassinated, I'm going to change the whole cabinet. Probably his biggest mistake, and there were many, was the day that he took office. He should have said to every one of his cabinet officials, turn in your resignation. I am going to create a cabinet that serves me. I'm not going to create a cabinet that serves the legacy of John Kennedy, because that's what they were concerned about. And he doesn't get their support, and he doesn't get their alliance. And when Vietnam goes belly up, they're going to throw him under the bus, not the reverse. Right? So Johnson himself is going to be in this kind of awkward situation. The Johnson 60s, all of his goals are successful. So in that sense, good to hear. Number one, hardline against communism. Yay, we got Vietnam War, right? I mean, it was kind of baked into the cake. He does nothing to alter that trajectory. And escalation, whether and if, it's a guessing game, whether and if John Kennedy would have followed the same path, rolling thunder and escalation and all that kind of stuff is an unanswerable question. He is going to pass legislation. Again, you look at administrations, you look and say, well, when we get to Reagan administration, how do you judge an administration? By the laws they pass. Executive orders don't mean shit. The executive comes in, they just reverse it. By the laws you pass. What laws does he pass? He passes an entire agenda of issues that we'll talk about in more detail. And the last thing he wants to do is to redesign the New Deal coalition. He recognizes the fragility of the Democratic Party in the South. And as a master politician, take my word for it, but there's libraries for all this stuff. You have to ask yourself, why is this guy willfully torpedoing the party that he loves? And the argument is because it's the right thing to do. That's the argument that he would make. Again, not many politicians you would put in that category. I know I am losing, in his own language, 1 million votes a month in the South as a result of civil rights legislation. But that's why I'm in office. I'm in office to do things, right? So his own administration is going to redefine the Democratic Party, not always in successful ways in regards to winning elections. Okay, I will stop there a little bit earlier.